It didn't begin with a dramatic speech, no royal announcement, no grand moment on cathedral steps. The biggest shakeup in modern monarchy history slipped in quietly, deep inside glowing server rooms where government records sit untouched for years. One blinking cursor hovered over two names, then click, gone in a second. Decades of royal history wiped clean just like that. Two names that once stood for a modern royal future suddenly vanished without a trace. No press briefing, no formal statement, just empty space where Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana once appeared, leaving royal watchers staring at their screens in shock. And something about it felt off, like this was only the surface of a much bigger move. This wasn't some random glitch or tech error. This felt precise, deliberate, almost surgical. A quiet digital strike that cut deep, separating a prince's children from their place in history without a single word spoken. And while people rushed to figure out what happened, whispers started spreading about something far darker behind the scenes. Talk of secret Hollywood meetings, private documents slipping into the wrong hands, and even voices from the past resurfacing in ways nobody expected. The deeper you look, the less this feels like a simple decision, and the more it starts to look like a chain reaction that was set off long before anyone noticed. And strangely, the spark didn't even come from London. It started across the ocean, inside a tightly controlled PR suite in Hollywood where reputations are built and broken every day. Early January, Meghan Markle was reportedly surrounded by top media strategists, shaping narratives and controlling headlines like a pro. But then something shifted. What was meant to be a casual moment turned into something way bigger. Sources claimed she proudly said her son Archie had more spark than Prince George, hinting he was the one truly meant to shine. In any normal family, that's just a proud parent talking. But this isn't a normal family, and that one comment hit way harder than expected. Because inside the royal system, nothing is casual and hierarchy isn't optional. By comparing her son to the future king, it wasn't taken as harmless pride. It was seen as stepping into dangerous territory. The monarchy runs on strict order, where birth decides everything, not personality or public appeal. So when that comment made its way quietly across the Atlantic, landing on the desks of senior palace officials, it wasn't ignored. It was noted, analyzed, and treated like a serious issue. And once that line was crossed, things started moving behind closed doors in a way the public was never meant to see. Prince George isn't just a child in this system. He represents the future of the crown, carefully guided from birth toward one role only. Every detail of his life is part of something much bigger, built over centuries to protect stability. So the idea of another spotlight forming elsewhere, especially outside royal control, raised serious concerns inside palace walls. And instead of responding publicly, the institution chose silence, followed by action. Removing those names wasn't random. It was a signal, clear and cold, that something had shifted for real this time. But what pushed it to that point goes even deeper than a single comment. Because behind that move, there were already tensions building since 2019, quietly stacking up out of public view. Then in mid-2025, things took another turn when a set of leaked documents surfaced, tied to an office most people have never even heard of. Suddenly, records that had been locked away under strict privacy rules started appearing, raising more questions than answers. Among them was a document linked to a California fertility clinic dated just weeks before Archie's reported birth in London. And what it suggested didn't match the official story people had been told. According to that document under maternal source, there was a term that instantly caught attention: surrogate used, with Meghan listed as an intended parent. Those two words might seem small, but inside royal law, they carry serious weight. Because the rules around succession aren't flexible, they're built on centuries-old legal foundations that don't easily bend. And if those details are accurate, it opens up a situation the monarchy has quietly tried to avoid for generations. One that could challenge more than just public perception. At the center of it all sits the Act of Settlement from 1701, a law created during a time when control over the throne meant everything. Its wording may feel outdated, but its impact still shapes who can stand in line for the crown today. And hidden inside those old rules are strict conditions that don't leave much room for interpretation, which is exactly why what surfaced in those documents started raising alarms behind palace doors, setting the stage for what comes next. For centuries, the rule has been simple and strict. An heir must be born of the body of a royal and their legally married spouse. That wording comes from a time when science was basic and there were no modern fertility methods to complicate things. But that old rule suddenly became a huge problem. Because if Archie was not physically born by the Duchess, then under a strict reading of the 1701 law, he wouldn't have been eligible for the line of succession at all, and that changes everything in a way the public wasn't prepared for. This means the palace's actions may not have been about emotions or personal conflict at all. It points to something much colder, a legal correction that had been quietly delayed for years. What looked like tension or distance between Harry, Meghan, and the royal family may have actually been tied to a deeper issue that couldn't be openly discussed. And once that detail starts to connect, the 2020 royal exit stops looking like a personal choice and starts looking like something far more controlled behind the scenes. Insiders later described Archie's birth situation as a quiet emergency, something handled far away from cameras and headlines. That famous Sandringham meeting with the Queen, Charles, William, and Harry suddenly takes on a completely different meaning. It wasn't just about stepping back from duties or finding peace. It was about containing a situation that could shake the monarchy at its core. And hidden inside that agreement was a clause so carefully worded, most people never noticed what it really meant. That clause, buried in formal language, essentially created a silent deal. The Crown would avoid digging into sensitive questions about lineage. And in return, Harry and Meghan would step away and live privately. No investigations, no exposure, no escalation. It was a fragile balance, built on both sides, keeping things quiet. For a moment, it worked. But only for a while, because that silence didn't last the way it was expected to. Everything shifted during the Oprah interview in 2021. What was supposed to be a personal conversation turned into a direct challenge to the institution itself. Harry and Meghan didn't just share their struggles. They described the monarchy in harsh terms and suggested deeper issues behind palace walls. With every interview, documentary, and book release that followed, that original agreement started to crack more and more, and from the palace's perspective, that silence they had agreed on was no longer being respected. Once that line was crossed, the situation changed fast. The understanding that held everything together was effectively broken, and with it, the Crown was no longer bound to stay quiet. What had been contained for years was now at risk of coming out in full. But it wasn't just about words or interviews anymore. Something far more concrete was about to surface, and it carried real consequences. In late 2025, during a routine financial audit of the sovereign grant, investigators stumbled onto something unexpected. At first glance, it looked like standard paperwork, until certain transactions started raising serious questions. A company based in Delaware, Arch Genesis LLC, appeared in records tied to large payments that didn't quite add up. And once those numbers were examined closely, the situation quickly escalated. The listed expenses were detailed and hard to ignore. Tens of thousands for agency services, over 100,000 for legal arrangements, and even more for medical-related costs. But the biggest issue wasn't just what the money was for, it was where it allegedly came from. Reports suggested the funds had been redirected from a budget meant to renovate Frogmore Cottage, a royal property funded through public money. If accurate, that creates two serious problems at once. One tied to royal succession laws, and another tied to the use of taxpayer funds. Either one alone would be difficult. But together, they form a situation the monarchy couldn't afford to ignore any longer. Quiet handling was no longer an option, and the approach inside the palace shifted almost instantly. King Charles III, backed by Princess Anne and with Prince William in agreement, moved quickly to bring in top legal minds. This wasn't about public image anymore. It was about locking down the rules with absolute clarity. They needed something direct, powerful, and impossible to challenge. And that's where one of the monarchy's strongest legal tools came into play. A letters patent prepared to settle the matter in a way that would echo far beyond this moment. On January 18, 2026, King Charles made it official. And the wording hit like a precision strike. The update wasn't broad or vague, it was exact and deliberate. It stated that royal succession and titles belong only to those born from a lawful biological union between a royal descendant and their recognized spouse. Those words weren't sluchino chosen. They were loaded with meaning and aimed straight at one issue. That single phrase instantly redrew the line. Any situation involving surrogacy or unclear biological ties was now pushed outside the boundaries of succession, no exceptions. And it didn't just apply going forward. It reached back. Within just 36 hours of the document being signed, the names of Archie and Lilibet were quietly removed from the official royal website. The public saw the result, but the deeper story behind it had been building for years. And very few people knew how far back it really went. Inside the palace, the mood wasn't explosive or chaotic. It was calm, almost final. This wasn't about reacting, it was about closing a chapter that had been under review for a long time. But just as the public started debating what it all meant, something unexpected surfaced from deep within Windsor's archives. Something prepared long before any of this became public. Hidden under the label Kensington Protocol 14C was a sealed envelope marked with Queen Elizabeth II's personal wax seal. It carried a simple instruction: to be opened when tested. And on February 29, 2026, that moment arrived as public narratives around the situation intensified. When the seal was finally broken, what was inside shifted the entire tone of the situation in a way no one saw coming. The letter was short, just one page, dated October 5, 2022, weeks before the Queen's passing. But every word carried weight. In her own handwriting, she reflected on the future of the monarchy she had protected for decades. She wrote about character, duty, and the meaning of inheritance, making it clear where her trust stood. She named William, Catherine, and their children directly, emphasizing stability, responsibility, and continuity over anything else. She wrote, "Let George wear the crown. Let Charlotte keep its dignity. Let Louis guard its grace." And then came the line that echoed the loudest: that titles are not automatic, and stepping away from duty comes with consequences. It wasn't a legal command, but it didn't need to be. The message carried symbolic power that cut straight through the noise. That letter landed like a shockwave. For years, the Queen had remained publicly neutral, never stepping into the back and forth. But this was different. This was her final perspective, written in private and revealed at the exact moment it would matter most. And suddenly, King Charles's actions didn't look isolated. They looked aligned with something much deeper. But while the palace was tightening its structure, a new move was already taking shape across the ocean. In California, a trademark filing appeared under a corporation linked to Meghan's foundation. And the name alone raised eyebrows: Royal Reclamation. The concept behind it didn't hold back either, pushing a narrative that directly challenged the monarchy's authority in a bold and very public way. The product ideas turned heads instantly. Children's clothing, storybooks centered on lost birthrights, and even a toddler shirt printed with the phrase "Future King, but not yours." Then came the visuals. A teaser video mixing soft family imagery with historic royal footage, creating a clear and emotional contrast. The message wasn't subtle. It was direct, and it was designed to spark reaction. One of the most talked about pieces was a storybook featuring a character called Little Lionheart, standing in the shadows while a crown is given to another child in a royal setting. The symbolism was obvious, and inside palace walls it didn't go unnoticed. Because now, this wasn't just commentary. It was storytelling that placed real figures into a fictional conflict. For the Prince and Princess of Wales, that crossed a line. Reports said Catherine was especially concerned, seeing it as something that pulled children into a narrative they never asked to be part of. And once that shift happened, the palace didn't respond with statements or interviews. They responded in the way they know best. No public arguments, no emotional reactions, just action behind the scenes. The royal institution leaned into its strongest advantage: structure, law, and time-tested systems. Working through official channels, they coordinated with the College of Arms and began issuing formal notices to those involved in producing and distributing the campaign materials. Princess Anne took a leading role in the response, steady and precise as always. Internal notes reflected a clear stance that the crown's identity isn't something to be turned into a commercial tool. A detailed report was compiled, laying out concerns about how royal imagery and claims were being used. And as those steps quietly unfolded, it became clear this situation was far from over. With the next move already beginning to take shape, warnings started going out fast. Streaming platforms and media partners were quietly told to steer clear of using royal imagery tied to sensitive figures, including photos connected to Prince George and official residences. Then came a move that didn't need words at all. At a charity event in Leeds, Princess Catherine appeared wearing the Jubilee Star brooch, a rare piece reserved only for monarchs and direct heirs. No statement, no explanation, just diamonds making the message crystal clear. The strategy was subtle but powerful. No public clash, just signals that carried weight. Even the smallest details, like timing and presentation, were carefully watched. And just like that, momentum began to shift. Royal Reclamation started losing support as retail partners quietly backed away, not wanting to be tied to rising controversy. What looked bold at first suddenly began to lose traction. And it didn't stop there. Public opinion followed right behind. Polling data showed support slipping, with many Marduk feeling uncomfortable about how the situation was playing out. The biggest concern wasn't about titles or status anymore. It was about boundaries. As one former press official put it, using one child to push against another crossed a line that people weren't willing to ignore. That perception changed everything, and once it set in, it was hard to reverse. Right in the middle of that shift, Prince Harry was spotted landing at Heathrow, alone. Speculation exploded instantly, with talk of possible reconciliation spreading everywhere. But the reality was far more serious. He made a private visit to Princess Anne at her estate, and the meeting was brief, direct, and far from emotional. Less than an hour later, it was over. And the tone of that meeting said more than any headline could. When Princess Anne was later asked about repairing the relationship, her response was short and sharp. One cannot reconcile with methods. That single line landed heavy. It showed just how far things had moved beyond personal disagreement. Inside the institution, this was no longer seen as family tension. It was viewed as a coordinated challenge that had gone too far. Then came one final attempt to regain control, a charity auction titled A Future for Archie and Lilibet. But it unraveled almost instantly. Viewers noticed a tiara on display that closely resembled one worn by Princess Charlotte, and that detail triggered immediate backlash. The implication alone was enough to spark serious concern, and within moments, the broadcast was shut down. The palace responded quickly with a clear and direct statement. No royal items had been sold, gifted, or authorized for auction. That was the final turning point. After that, the remaining support behind the campaign collapsed, and the broader narrative shifted for good, because at its core, the monarchy doesn't operate like a brand or a business. It doesn't rely on trends, media cycles, or public campaigns to prove its place. Its power comes from history, structure, and laws that have stood for generations. That's something that can't be recreated through products or messaging, no matter how polished it looks. Prince George's position isn't about attention or personality. It's about duty, structure, and a role defined from birth. And those empty spaces on the royal website, they don't just represent missing names. They reflect a system that doesn't bend once a line is crossed. Now, with everything settled on the surface, attention shifts forward. The House of Windsor continues preparing its future, focused on stability and continuity, while the path taken elsewhere moves in a completely different direction. And as this chapter closes, the real question isn't what happened. It's what unfolds next from here. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next.